he says. Right, welcome guys. Obviously I've done the introduction, so you kind of know who I am. But so yeah, so I did myself and a JV partner did a rent-to-own tenant buyer deal a couple of years ago, and I've just started about a month or so ago, negotiated another one, which we're in the throes of going through at the moment. And I put a couple of posts out in a couple of groups, and a few people jumped on it and said, can you just do a bit of background on, what is a tenant buyer, what is rent to own, how does it all work, how do you structure it? So I've put together a bit of a presentation. What I'm going to do is fly through it, I hope, relatively quickly, and then what I thought might be the best thing to do is when we get to the end, I'll just do a bit of a Q&A. If anybody's got got any questions on it, then I can obviously answer those. Hopefully most of it will be answered as I go through, but I'm sure there'll be questions at the end. So first thing, obviously, what is a tenant buyer? How does rent to own actually work? So in essence, it's a scheme that's designed for people, to help people who can't currently get on the property ladder for whatever reason. And there's a number of reasons which I'll go into in a minute. And the way it works, the way it's structured is they move in, they carry on, they're renting initially, but they pay over an extended period of time whilst they're in there renting. So they get, it's kind of a little bit of a hybrid, best of both worlds. The best way to kind of understand it and describe it really to the layman is, it's a very, very similar principle to taking out a PCP on a car. You're effectively renting it as you go along, and then a period in the future, you've then paid a certain amount down on that product, and then you just obviously buy the remainder of it. Typically what you'll do is you'll agree a future fixed sale price, which ultimately needs to match the situation. So it needs to match both the landlord situation and the tenant buyer situation. So it's like a lot of property models. It's not rocket science. It's quite a simple process and a simple structure once you get your head around it. But as always, it's the detail and the complexities in it which obviously make it a little bit more tricky. So what type of person needs this? Who are our kind of ideal avatar audience, if you like, from a tenant buyer point of view? So really, it's perfect for anybody that's only got a very, very small deposit. People that are stuck in a rental rut. Been renting for years, can't seem to pull together tens of thousands of pounds worth of deposit. People with bad credit history is really good for. People who are self-employed and obviously unable to prove their income. People who are new into the UK. Obviously kind of immigrants that are coming in and obviously are working. They're earning good money. I know this has worked. I haven't done it personally, but I know other people that have done quite a lot of these with kind of Eastern European workers, where they're in the UK. They're maybe they might be tradesmen. They're earning good money, but they just haven't got their credit because they've not been in the UK for long enough. Graduates is another good one. They might have literally just come out of university. They've got good jobs lined up, but again, they've got no kind of wages, income history. And potentially, the overarching thing there is anyone who ultimately gets refused a mortgage. So it can be open. I mean, those are kind of like the headline kind of typical things that spring to mind. But obviously, there can be a hell of a lot of other different situations that people might be in, which means they just either can't get a mortgage or buying in a conventional way doesn't work for them. So, what are the benefits to the tenant buyer? So, the fundamental ones really are, as I kind of hinted on earlier on, it's low cost of entry. So there is a small initial contribution, but it is relatively small when you compare it to obviously a bigger deposit, mortgage deposit. From the tenant buyer point of view, they've got control of the property, so they get to have that feeling of ownership. They feel safe. They don't feel like the landlord is going to sell the property from underneath them a few months down the line, 6 months down the line. The tenant buyer can also, once they're in, everything's signed up and all the agreements in place, they can then spend money if they choose to on improvements. So if they're in there, they decide they want to put double glazing in, or they want to put a conservatory on, or they want to do stuff to the garden, whatever it may be, they can feel comfortable and safe in the fact that they can make investments into the property, obviously with written permission by the investor. But I certainly personally wouldn't deny them the permission to do anything unless it was something really, really weird and wonderful, I guess, that could devalue the property if it didn't go through for some reason. But typically most home improvements wouldn't be an issue. And as I say, it just makes them kind of feel that it's their own home. The whole idea of this is to make them feel that from day one, the minute they take on that agreement, that is their property. Although technically they're renting in the initial stages, that is theirs and they can do what they want to it. There's no lengthy mortgage approval process for the tenant buyer, so it's down to the investor to kind of do their own screening and their own kind of credit checks and all that kind of stuff, which obviously by its very nature is a lot less onerous than if you're going through a mortgage process. And the future, there's the kind of safety that the future purchase price is locked in. So when you start the agreement, you start the process, you both agree what your future purchase price is going to be. It's all locked in. It's all written into the contract. And if the market then increases and there's capital growth, then that is obviously an upside for the tenant buyer. Because obviously, as I say, the price is the price that's locked in. So, if the market outstrips that, then they've got equity sitting there as well, which obviously can be a nice additional bonus for them. So, how do you structure? Benefits to the investor. Skipped a slide. So certainly from my point of view, and generally speaking as well, you get to help someone who's struggling to buy their own home first and foremost. So it's nice to be able to do that. It's got a bit of a feel-good factor to it. From more of a business point of view, you get a tenant in the property that's responsible. They're going to look after the property. As I said, they're hopefully going to be treating it like their own home. So they're going to be looking after it. They're going to be maintaining it properly. They're going to be respecting it. By its very nature, you're not going to have any voids because the tenant buyer is there for the long term. So straight away that is eradicated, as is the letting agent's management fees. So you don't need any of that stuff in because you don't need anybody managing it. It's between you and the tenant buyer. And as I say, as long as you've done your kind of checks and balances up front, then you should be able to be trusting that person in there. Naturally, it's not something you can just go and put them in there and forget about it for the next 2, 3, 4 years. You need to kind of keep on top of it, I would suggest. But certainly you don't need letting agents management fees in there. And as I say, as I mentioned on the last slide, it's the agreed future sale price is all locked in. So from an investor point of view, you know exactly when you're entering the deal, exactly what your exit is, what those margins look like, what the profit looks like. So it's all there in black and white and above board. So how do you structure a deal? So keep the numbers simple. I've just used very, very round numbers. But in essence, the way it works is the tenant buyer will pay market rent. Now, on top of that, you've then got the purchase of the property, if you like, to worry about. So what you do is you set your future purchase price. So in this case, we'll call it 100K. Now, at the end of the term, when they come to the point where they're going to buy that property from you, they're going to need a 90% LTV mortgage, so they're going to need a 10% deposit. That's generally what the numbers we work to. I think Wayne will probably back us up here that that's probably a pretty safe number to work to. There's normally not too much of an issue to get a 90% residential mortgage historically. So what you then do is you take that £10,000 that they need to have by the end of the period. You take an upfront option consideration fee, which should be anywhere between 3 and 5% of the future purchase price as a rule. Obviously, the more you can get, the better. But again, it depends. It's a case of kind of communication and making sure it works for both sides. So in this case, we'll do kind of a 50-50, or more or less 50-50 split. So they've got $5,200 to pay up front, which they've got available to put down. So you take that as the upfront consideration, and that leaves $4,800 to split over the period of the term that you set out. So in this case, again, to keep the numbers simple, we'll say it's a 4-year term, so 48 months. 4,800 divided by 48 is £100 a month. So whatever their monthly rent is, so let's say for argument's sake they're paying you £500 a month rent, they also then need to pay you another £100 on top of that per month, which effectively chips off towards the end deposit. Now, the beauty of this is that you can, there's no kind of right or wrong or no kind of fixed term in this. So you can kind of structure the term to fit whatever works for both sides. So if, for example, the tenant buyer had, they couldn't afford £100 a month extra, they could only afford 50. Well, in that case, you push the term out to 8 years. Do you know what I mean? So you can always, you've got that kind of give and take. Equally, if they had, if they could afford £200 a month, then you could potentially strip it down to 2 years. The only thing that I personally think on that is you want the term probably long enough, because if you're going to be adding on a little bit of a premium for the future purchase price, which obviously you want to do as an investor, you want to make sure that you're earning something on the property. You probably want to be, spreading it out for a few years so that you've got that. Also the tenant buyer has got that that opportunity to take advantage of a little bit of that capital growth. But as I say, there's no kind of there's no fixed term from that point of view. The only thing to kind of consider on that is if you're taking the property yourself on an option and then doing kind of a back-to-back with the tenant buyer, you need to make sure that the term that you've got in place with the tenant buyer is less than the term you've got in place with the current owner on the option, if that makes sense. So if you've got an 8-year option with the owner, you obviously don't want any more than a 7-year option with the tenant buyer, because you need a bit of wiggle room in between. Hope that makes sense. Sorry. So the process. Now, a lot of people ask this and say, well, how does this work? What do you need to do first? You need to find the property. Do you need to find a tenant buyer? And obviously it is a little bit of a chicken and egg. And again, I would say there's no right or wrong answer. I've done it both ways. And the first, I'll come on to the case study in a minute, but the first one that I did, we had the property, myself and my JV investor, we bought the property. We then had to go out and find a tenant buyer. And I found it quite an arduous process from a marketing point of view, because you've obviously got a fixed asset and you've got to find somebody that really wants that property. They want to be, they don't just want to be living in it from a rental point of view. They want to be in it, for the long haul. So it's got to obviously tick a lot more boxes than if they were just looking at it from a rental point of view. So from that perspective, I would always say try to, again, if I was going to do it again, I would always try and find the tenant buyer first. And the way I would recommend doing it, and certainly I would do it myself, is almost try to get the tenant buyer to source the property for you. So get them to go out to market, get them to spend all the time finding what they want, and then look at how you do it, look at how you secure it, whether you're buying it or whether you're going to try and get that on on an option. Again, this is where it kind of gets a little bit more complicated as a model, because you obviously need to understand, if you're going to do this stuff, you need to understand lease options. You need to understand how to structure that with the potential vendor. And obviously, if you're going to be purchasing the property on their behalf, there's obviously other things to take into account, but I'll come on to those in a couple of minutes on the case studies. But as I say, it's like any business, I guess. Marketing is absolutely critical. And I don't think that matters, regardless of what property model you're doing or what business you're in. Marketing is that's what it always comes down to. You've got to put in the legwork and you've got to put in the hard work on that, really, just to get the numbers up. So from a process point of view on the marketing, what I did on the first one was I started out by putting ads out to the market. So I put ads out on Gumtree and I can't remember the other ones I put them out. It was a couple of years ago now, but it was mainly on Gumtree. Are you currently stuck in the rental rut? Do you tick these boxes? Are you this sort of person? Do you have bad credit? Are you struggling to get a mortgage? All the stuff that I went through earlier. I got inundated with replies, responses on those ads. I put about 2 or 3 ads out in a couple of different areas. And then really it's just a case of being available to take those calls or to obviously to pick up those emails, and just getting your head down really and speaking to people, qualifying them. So I did about 3 or 4 rounds of qualification. So I spoke to them initially, and out of that, I had about 40 odd responses. Out of those 40 odd responses, probably 30 of them I managed to speak to, or or didn't hang up straight away that it was either in the wrong area or just they misunderstood the ad. I then left it a few days, went back to those 30. Out of those 30, probably half of them dropped off because they thought about it overnight and thought it wasn't for them, or didn't answer my call, or whatever it might have been. And I just basically, it was just a process of whittling it down, and then what you want to be doing at the end then is get it down to your core in your mind, the ones that you've had the conversations, you know their history, you understand their circumstances, their situation, what they're looking for, what they're all about, and kind of do as much of the due diligence on them as you can, and then basically run an open house. And that was what we did. We just went out and got everybody there at the same time. The property that I did was over in Wales, so it wasn't on my doorstep. So my JV partner, my business partner, went over there for the weekend, and he met people at the house and just went through it there and then. So it is just legwork and tenacity, really, and that's the kind of hard part of it. But of course, you could, if you were doing this as as one of your main kind of income streams, one of your main strategies, you could obviously start to systemize that, outsource a lot of it. You potentially have get automated call handling, or money penny, or VAs, or whatever it might be, to start taking the calls and working through the questionnaires. But as I say, when I did it, I was doing it all myself, so it was quite tedious. But yeah, just to kind of reiterate, really, it's down to the marketing and the processes on that. Once you've found the right tenant buyer, typically there's two separate contracts. So you've got an option agreement, which gives them the option but not the obligation to buy at an agreed price at the end of the term, whatever that term looks like. It's a relatively standard option agreement. Obviously, you need to get that done by a qualified, experienced solicitor or law firm, and you really want to be going to a firm that have experience of doing options for tenant buyers, because there are a couple of little nuances on it. You probably don't want to be going to a standard standard conveyancer or a standard solicitor. The tenant buyer also needs to get their own option agreement done, their own contracts, and they need to use a totally separate, totally independent legal firm to do that. So there's no kind of conflict of interest. But that's, again, relatively simple. So you go through, get the heads of terms sorted out, which is obviously just pretty much a one-page document, just outlining what everybody's agreeing on it. So you've obviously got the term, you've got all the figures in there, who's responsible for what, who isn't responsible for other things, and then obviously just get that signed by both parties, and then that can obviously be sent on to the law firms. And the second part of the agreement is kind of a standard tenancy agreement, really, which gives them the right to occupy the property on a rental basis in the short term. Now, the first deal that I did, we didn't have a tenancy agreement in place, but we had a management agreement. But I will come on to why we use that in a minute when I get onto the numbers and stuff. But yeah, as I say, typically it'd be the option and the tenancy agreement. Sometimes you might want the management if you ended up doing one like I did, which is not your standard run of the mill, to be fair. So rattling through the case study. So there's quite a lot of numbers here. So I've tried to lay it out so it's as clear as possible. I hope it is. Obviously, I'll talk it all through, but as I say, we can jump back into it if anybody's got any specific questions on the numbers afterwards. So this was a property in Wales, a place called Cross Street, and we bought the property cash for. I've rounded the numbers to keep it easy, but it was a tad under 40 grand. Legals and fees were 7.5 grand. So this was a deal that we bought from a deal packager. So there was deal packaging fees in that. Obviously legals, there was no stamp, but obviously there were other fees and bits and pieces all rolled into that. The refurb, it was a full back to brick total renovation. So that came in at 24.5 grand. So total, it stood us in 72 grand. We then refinanced after about 6 months, 75% loan to value. We only got 75k reval, which was a bit annoying. We were trying to get a bit more, but it got just the way the revals were working at the time. It was just down valued ever so slightly. So we managed to pull just over 56 grand out of it. So that left us with 15,750 in the deal. So had we originally were going to rent this out so when we first bought it, we were going to do it as a single, just a basic single let. Once we kind of got into it, what triggered this was I did some no money down training with Progressive, and me being me, I did the training and learned about tenant buyers and thought, well, I fancy doing that. I'm going to get my teeth into that. And I was like a dog with a bone. And I said to my business partner Dan, I said, look, do you mind if we just if we crack on with this and we try to prove this model out to make sure it works? And we bought it cash, so we didn't have any, we had no mortgage outgoings on it. So it wasn't, we were able, we had a little bit of headroom that we were able to kind of hold fire for a couple of months on it, just to prove it out. So, but had we have done it operated it as a normal standard single let, the numbers are obviously there. So it would have been $550 a month rent. So we did it to a standard where we smashed the ceiling anyway. Everybody told us it was going to be $450, $475. When the agents came around, they valued it at $550, and we did actually have somebody who was interested in it at $550. Agents fees working on 12%, 66 quid a month. Insurance was about 25 quid a month. Voids and maintenance, again, I've got 100 quid a month in there. That obviously covers all your landlord certs and all that kind of stuff. You could argue that's should be a little bit higher than that, maybe a little bit lower, I don't know, but that's the sort of number we would have had in there. Mortgage that we had on it once we did revalue was 125 quid a month. So that would have given us a net profit monthly of 234. So a net annual profit of 2808. So based on the 15,750 that we had left in it once we refinanced it, that would have given us 17.8 return on capital employed just as a single let, which was okay, but it was a little bit less than we were hoping for. So what we did eventually is we found a tenant buyer. So we agreed a future purchase price based on, so we looked at a 44-month term. The future price was 92,500. So it gave us a sort of 20 grand uplift on the actual property price. Monthly rent was 550. In actual fact, it was 500 we charged the guy, but I'll come on to this in a minute, but he was renting it out at 550, but we charged him 500. Agents fees obviously was zero. Insurance was still 25 quid. Voids and maintenance was zero because we got no voids. We got no maintenance because that's all down to the tenant buyer. He agreed to do everything. Any issues he was responsible for. Obviously, no landlord safety certs and checks because he was taking care of all of that. It was all written into the contract. Mortgage was still 125 quid. So net profit was 400. So in actual fact, it was 350. But in essence, that gave us going to be just short of 70% increase in profit and a return on capital employed of almost 30%. Now, if we'd have run that purely on a standard tenant buyer model where they've got to pay, they need to find the 10% deposit, they would have needed to have found 9,250 by the end of the 44 months. Up front would have been 4,625, and then the monthly top up would have been 105 quid per month on top. Now, what this guy actually did, as we were about to sign, he said his situation was he was a youngish guy. He's from Cardiff, lived with his mum and dad, but he just got a job, or fairly recently, just got a job out in Africa as a helicopter engineer, and he was earning something like $120,000 or something. But he was getting paid offshore. He was finding it really, really difficult to get lines of credit in this country. So he wanted basically to be buying this as an investment. So although it was a tenant buyer model and a structure, it actually ended up being just a kind of an installment plan. So we basically gave him, and it was kind of a 0% payment plan on a property. So he, rather than just paying 105 a month as a top up, he ended up paying, well, it varied between 5 and 10 grand a month on top, pretty much every month. So what that meant for us was that within, crikey, I can't remember the exact time scale now, but certainly within 6 months of him taking it on, he'd paid us back the 1,750 that we had money left in the deal. He paid that back, so we were totally cash neutral on the deal. And then he just continued to keep on paying that. And we kept saying to him, look, you don't need to do this. You've got it for 44 months. String it out. We've set the future purchase price as we all agreed, for 44 months' time. But he had cash burning a hole in his pocket basically, and he just said, "Look, let's just get this over and done with, and I'll pay it." So he actually ended up paying it. I think it was 13 months after we did the deal. So for us, it was fantastic because I'd obviously calculated all the margins that we wanted to be getting, all the profit that we wanted to be getting out of the job, and all it did was just accelerated that. We gave him a bit of a discount up front. We wrote it into the original contract. He asked right at the beginning. He said, "Look, if I pay it off early, can I have a discount?" And we said, I say right at the beginning, it was just before we signed the contracts. And I said, "Well, you can't really." I said, "Because we've worked out, and this is how we've structured it to get the returns that we want to get on that property." But what we did agree was a bit of a sliding scale. So if he paid it back sooner, within a certain threshold of months, then we give him a discount. And all we did was we calculated the interest that we would have saved on the mortgage payments, and gave him, I think we gave him about 70% of that. So he thought he got a fantastic deal because he got a good discount at the end, and we obviously didn't lose out of it because we just wrote off what we would have been paying on interest anyway. So again, a bit of a win-win. So just looking at the numbers, this was the final profit on the deal. So as I say, sold it for 92,500. It stood us in 72 grand, as I say, which was cash. So we had a 20,500 uplift on the actual property price. The rental income, which was the profit, so again, as I say, it's actually 350 times 44. The total profit is there, so whatever that is, just under 38 grand. Return on the initial investment would have been around 50%, but the return on the money left in post refinance, once we only had that 15,750 in the deal, was like 240, 230, 240%, which is obviously amazing. And as I say, that all got paid off within about 6 months of being into the deal. So obviously it's very difficult to work out return on capital and stuff like that on a deal that was this short, but whatever way you cut it, it worked out really, really well. Worked out well for him. He got what he wanted, and it worked out well for us because we obviously made a nice return on that property in a relatively short space of time. So that was the first one. The second one, obviously, it's going through at the moment, so I can't be too specific on the details and the numbers because that wouldn't be fair. But we put the deal together. The background to it is it's somebody that I know. So they approached me about 2 or 3 months ago and said, "Look, we're renting this property at the moment. We've been in it for about a year. The landlord has just given us notice saying that they want to sell it. So the landlord that's owned it for years unfortunately passed away. He's left it to his kids. They've decided they don't want to be accidental landlords, so they want to sell it and cash in. So they've given the tenant notice. He said, "Look, I really want this place. We've been here for a while. We've got plans. We know exactly what we want to do to it. This is we want to stay here." But he's got adverse credit. So he owned his own company, was self-employed a few years ago. Something went wrong. I think he got knocked by a supplier or a client. Knocked by a client. And I think he just needed to shut the company down. So he's got, I don't know whether he went through an IVA. I don't think it was an IVA, but he's obviously got adverse credit on his file. So he thinks that in 2 to 3 years' time, he'll be clear and he'll be able to get a mortgage. So that's fine. We've obviously done a bit of background checking, but as I say, I know him, I trust him. And what we've done is we've structured the deal where, again, I'm working with a different joint venture investor. They're buying the property with a mortgage. And basically all I've done is I've looked at what our purchase costs are, including stamp duty, plus all the legals, all the arrangement fees, every cost associated with the purchase of that property, including the costs on the way out for conveyancing. And I've just worked it back, just value engineered it, or reverse engineered it, so that we know exactly what we want to be getting out of it to be able to tie that. My investor's going to be tying about 40 odd grand up in this at the front end. So we've just worked out what we need to be getting back in order to have that money tied up. And everybody's happy. The tenant is over the moon because he gets to stay in his property. The vendor is over the moon because they got pretty much asking price for what they were after. We're obviously reasonably happy because we've obviously helped to mate out, but secondly, we've obviously getting a decent return for the investor, and obviously I'm getting my fees out of that as well. So it's going through conveyancing at the moment, which obviously is a bit of a slow process, but we're just plodding through that at the moment, and we're obviously going through options and legals now. And this is just a basic, bog standard, if you like, tenant buyer deal. So he's paying us a lump of money up front, and he's paying market rent. He's actually paying a little bit more rent than he has been up till now, because he's been getting it quite a little bit under market value. But he's agreed to pay us a little bit more because we needed that in order to pass the stress test on the buy-to-let mortgage. And he's 100% happy with that. And then he's obviously paying us an additional top up every month to make up his 10% at the end. Now, again, he thinks he might be able to, if his credit file's clear at the end of the 2 years and he's able to obviously to get his mortgage approved, then we can obviously tie it all up and part ways then. The property doesn't really need a lot of work doing to it. To be fair, it's in pretty good order. He wants to put a new kitchen, new bathroom in. He wants to build like a man cave in the garden. And again, we said to him, look, you do whatever you want to do. Just run it past us first. Let's just sign it off. But we've got no problems with you doing any of that. And from our point of view, the more, and any tenant buyer deal really, the more that tenant is willing to spend money on that property, the more chance you've got is that they're going to be staying there, because they're not going to be wanting to spend all that time, energy, and effort and kind of invest in that property if they've got no intention of staying. So it's quite a as I say, a fairly bog standard process really, pretty similar to the kind of the original example model that I showed you, except that obviously the number is a little bit different. The property is a little bit higher value. And the only thing really you need to be aware of is that you are going to be paying stamp duty on the way in. You've got to make sure you factor that in when you're working out your future agreed price. And to work out the future agreed price on this one, we looked at the market. We spoke to some local people, and obviously I'm talking to the guy that I know is the tenant, and the property we've bought, it was on the market for 130. In a good condition, if once the bathroom and the kitchen is done, on today's market, it'd be worth around 160. So straight away, we've got that 30 grand buffer in it. So he's looking at probably spending 5 to 10 grand on getting his kitchen and his bathroom done. So from his point of view, by spending a little bit of money, he's got straight away, he could potentially have 20, 25 grand equity in it from day one. And then we've just increased the final agreed purchase price just based on, we just extrapolate it out based on, I think we've worked on 3 or 4% a year market increase. But we've worked it out that even at the end of the 3-year period, even if the market hasn't moved that much, he should still have a buffer of about 30 grand of equity in it, provided he does these few little bits of work. But even if he doesn't, he's still going to be the right way, unless something really drastic happens and obviously the market crashes. But if that happens at any point, then all we do is we've got the flexibility to just increase the term. So when we get to the end of the option agreement, we'll just go again, and we'll just get an extension on the option agreement and extend it for another 2, 3, 4 years, whatever it needs to be, just until the market picks up and we get parity with the final purchase price. So that's why I like these. The beauty of it is it's totally flexible. As long as you've got those legals tied up and everybody's covered, you have got that flexibility to be able to to do different things with it and to work to make it work for the individuals. That is pretty much it from the point of view of the presentation. So any questions specifically on any of that, hopefully I'll be able to answer.
Hi Darren, I'm just conscious of the time, because obviously Giuseppe needs to go in a minute, and I think somebody will have a... Okay,
we'll jump in. Anybody's got any questions, jump in my breakout room then.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. If anybody wants to speak about what Darren's shared, if you can jump in his breakout room, which I'm going to open